Hello everyone, welcome back to the next part of A Dance with the Devil, episode 2. The devil walked down the dark avenue just as the clock in the centre of the town struck midnight. The streetlights reflected off his thick black hair and the sheen of his Italian suit as he approached her. She was sitting on a bench in the darkest corner, her head down as she stared at the cobblestones. She'd been calling to him for years. She'd been 10 the first time, after she'd lost a dance recital. He hadn't come to her then. She had not been desperate enough. She was 14 the next time she'd called. It had been right after she wasn't selected for the first company she'd applied to. Again, he hadn't been interested. She called him again tonight. He'd pondered his available amusements before deciding to come. It wasn't as if there weren't other options. Any day of the week, there were thousands of people trying to strike a deal with the devil. He was in high demand, always would be. The thing most humans didn't understand was that desperation had to age like a fine wine. If I was served too soon, it wouldn't yield nearly the same full-bodied taste. But now she was ready. She was worth the trip. He sat beside her, reclined against the bench, crossed his legs, and rested his arm along the back. There was a second of a pause before her body jerked. Her head shot up and she looked up at him, surprised someone had sat beside her and she hadn't even noticed their approach. "I've heard you want to make a deal, Anastasia." She shifted away from him on the bench, but she didn't get up. Oh yes, she was ready. Her chest rose and felt noticeably as she took in his face and then his clothes. He knew how he appeared to her, an attractive man in his 20s, financially well off and confident, the exact type of man she'd met so many times at ballet fundraisers, the kind of man she always hoped to catch the eye of and had always failed. "How do you know my name?" she asked. She should have been more alarmed, but he could see the appeal of her current form settle into the rapid rate of her heart. Her tongue darted out to wet her lips, in direct conflict to the logical response to retreat that most humans would have. "I know everyone's name, but especially those who call me." He reached into the pocket of his suit jacket and withdrew a cigar. It was rolled by Cubans in a place much warmer than Cuba. He looked over a slight imperfection of the cigar. They were going to pay for that later. "But I don't know who you are," she said. "Of course you do," he smiled, before he placed the cigar in his mouth, and with a flick of his hand a flame appeared at the tip of his finger, and he puffed away gently. "You're... are you..." Two nails went to her mouth as he took in her ratty appearance, drab hair, ashen skin, nothing overly remarkable. He took the cigar from his mouth and watched her visible discomfort with the smoke. Cancer wasn't going to be an issue for her soon. She'd have bigger problems if she struck a deal with him, which of course she was going to. She'd been calling to him for too long. "Who else you been calling to for a while?" he said, as he felt the strength of her life force. She wasn't much to look at, but she was healthy and strong. Her soul would be worth the aggravation. With all the people in the world, and so many of them willing to strike deals, he was much more selective than he used to be. But her soul would be worth it. Not a top-of-the-line recruit, but enough to bother with. "Can you help me?" she asked. Those were the magic words. She knew who he was and still wanted his help. This would be a quick one. It was going to be almost an easy as easy as pointing her in the right direction to go at a fork in the road. He rolled his eyes before he answered. I can do anything I want. I can make you the most famous dancer that ever lived. What do you want in return? He hated this part. One drunken night, and it had been centuries of contracts ever since. At least it kept that pain in the arse who lived upstairs out of his business now. Before it was constant squabbles. He reached into his suit again, and this time pulled out a single sheet of vellum. With a snap of his fingers, a quill pen appeared, right there in his other hand, and he gave both to her. All I need from you is a signature at the bottom of this contract. She held up the vellum until it was illuminated by the streetlight, and squinted as she tried to decipher the Latin. He always wanted to laugh when they tried to figure out what was in it. He might have made a drunken agreement, but there were ways around everything. So what happens exactly? I make all your dreams come true, and when you die, you're mine. And what does that mean exactly? Does it matter? He stood and held out his arm for her. She rose, placing her hand in the crook of his arm, and he began to walk with her. I know the pain you feel every day, the inadequacy, the way that you look, the way you talk about you. And they walked. People appeared, if walking out of the shadows, staring at her, whispering as they walked past. People who looked just like the dancers from her company. Imagine yourself on a stage right now, he said. And suddenly they weren't walking on cobblestones anymore, but across the wood of a stage, light shining at them as they moved toward the front. Suddenly the lights dimmed, and the crowd was roaring with cheers, getting to their feet and applauding her. The dark sweatpants and shirt she'd been wearing were now the costume of a prima ballerina. A man approached and handed her a bouquet of roses. He let her absorb it whole for a moment. He'd made it so real that she couldn't help but be absorbed into it. The scene, to feel the crowd's energy flow over her. You'll have a wonderful life. You'll be the most beautiful dancer. Whoever pirouetted across the stage. Every man will want you. You'll have the world at your fingertips. He moved in closer and said, more softly, they'll love you. Don't you want everything you've ever wished for to come true? And then once you've lived the most wonderful life you can imagine, you'll spend some time with me. I'm not as bad. You shouldn't listen to all the things they say about me. Listen to your gut. There's a reason you've been calling me since you were a child. You know what you should do. She nodded as she stared into the crowd, mesmerized. And then they faded away. Their cheers with them. And Anna and the devil were back to standing alone in the drizzly, dark evening. All you need to do is write your name, he said, as the contract and pen appeared in her hands. She held the sheet against her leg in the urgency to find somewhere to sign. When will all this happen? She asked, as she handed him the sheet. He folded it and tucked it away. Go home and go to sleep, knowing your entire life is about to change. She couldn't leave quickly enough, smiling the whole way. So what do you think, boss? She worth the effort? The small-scale demon asked as he came to stand beside him. The young man he'd appeared to be a minute ago, bearing roses, was completely gone. I think so, Bobber. I think so, the devil said, as he smoked his cigar and watched her disappear toward her apartment. And that's the end of episode 2, Dance with the Devil. I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did. It's a very interesting tale. And I shall see you again for part 3. Many blessings.